Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Whitney. Today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in May. I believe I read a total of 7 books in May, which I feel like May was a pretty slumpy month for me. I didn't read terrible books or anything. I just didn't read a whole lot. We were really busy in the month of May. My 2 middle kids and I went to Washington, D.C. for a weekend to visit some friends. Those friends came back home with us for a few days. My kids had their prom, their homeschool prom. We finished up the school year. So May was just a busy month. So when I found myself having downtime, I didn't feel like reading. Like I said, it just felt kind of like an off month for reading for me, but that's okay. So let's get right into the books that I did read. So the first 2 books I read this month were actually on audio. My daughter and I listened to one on our way to DC and then one on our way home. So the first one we listened to is Anne of Wendy Poplar's. This version I stole out of my daughter's room. It says Anne of Wendy Willows, but I guess that's the UK version maybe. I'm not sure, but I believe this is the 4th book in the Anne series. And in this book, Anne and Gilbert are finally engaged. But even though they're engaged, they can't be together. They're still apart for, I think, about 3 years because Anne is finishing up her schooling. And so this is comprised of a bunch of letters that they are writing back and forth to each other. And I just really liked that aspect of it. It felt a little, new and unique to the story. So also, it's not just letters. It tells the story of Anne. And she lives in Wendy Poplar's with 2 widows. And of course, the side characters are also so wonderful in the Anne books. But my daughter and I both really enjoyed listening to this one. So the second book I read, my daughter and I just continued on the series with Anne's House of Dreams. And I have to say that this is probably my favorite book in the entire series. I loved listening to this book. Gilbert and Anne are finally together. They're finally married. Gilbert is a doctor, and so they go to a small island and he starts his job. And Anne just makes this house that they're living in a home. It was perfect for her. It was right on the coast. And I just loved that she finally got all of her dreams. All of her dreams were coming true. And Ellen Montgomery went about it in a great way, I feel like, because it wasn't, oh, Anne got everything she wanted and she lived happily ever after, the end. Anne did get everything she wanted, but there were also so many hardships that she faced, and she still handled them with such grace. And, she was still Anne. And so she still, even through all of the hardships and the struggles that they faced, she still had such a great outlook on life. And I will say, I think my favorite character in the entire series was in this book, Miss Cornelia. She's hysterical. Savannah Grace and I were laughing out loud multiple times at her and her little catchphrase, "Isn't that just like a man?" We were just so tickled by her. I loved her so much. So Savannah Grace and I really enjoyed listening to this one together. Okay, so the next book I picked up was Winter, and this is the final book in the Lunar Chronicles. And I have to say, I'm glad this series was over. When I read Cress, the 3rd book, I was actually really enjoying it, but then this was such a slog for me. It's about 800, it's over 800 pages, whereas the other books were around 400. So it's double the page number. And it's you can tell, it feels like a long book. It just was a whole lot. And because this is the final book, they're not just focusing on Winter now. Winter is kind of like the retelling of Snow White, but they're also focusing on Cinder and Scarlet and Cress and their stories. And so it just felt like a lot. They were on Lunar, the whole thing is coming to a head. And the author, Marissa Meyer, she wrapped it up in a really pretty bow, which, there were no loose ends for any of the characters. And it was okay. It was fine. But I didn't like this one nearly as much as Cress. I feel like Cress was the strongest book in the series by far. I do have to read, I guess she wrote some short stories to accompany this series a while back. I never read those when I first read this series, so I'm going to read those so Savannah Grace can continue on because she enjoyed the series. So I will read the short stories, but I don't know. This was just okay for me. This was just okay. So the next book I picked up, I borrowed this from Tiffany from Beautiful Minutia. She was so kind to lend that to me. And it's Premeditated Myrtle. So this is a middle grade about Myrtle Hardcastle. And she is a little girl who is obsessed with gore and murders and death. And something happens at her neighbor's house that is a bit suspicious. And so she decides that she's going to investigate. And this was just a really cute book. I enjoyed Myrtle and her father and her nanny. I enjoyed the dynamics between the three of them. And this is the start of a series, and I definitely want to continue on with the series because it was funny. It was sweet and wonderful and lighthearted, and it was just great. It was a great middle grade detective novel. Okay, next book I picked up is Happy Place by Emily Henry. This is Emily Henry's newest book. It was just released, I think, in May, maybe April. I don't know. But I love Emily Henry's banter. She writes banter between characters so well. And another thing that I love about this book in particular was this was all about a friend group. I love the found family trope, and this was exactly what this was. These friends meet in college and they become friends for life. They meet up at the same little cottage in Maine every summer, and it's their favorite time. It's their favorite place to be. This is the last year that they can ever meet up at this little cottage because the cottage is selling. And so they want it to be perfect. Well, two of the characters have broken up, but they haven't told their friend group, and they decide that they're just going to stick it out and not tell them, to have one perfect last week at this cottage for old time's sake. And it was a dual timeline between the current time and lots of other times at the cottage or at college with the two main characters, and I just loved it. I really loved it. It was light, quick to read. The coastal setting was perfect for summer, so I really enjoyed this Emily Henry. Okay, the next book I picked up was Fairest. So this is part of the Lunar Chronicles, but it's not really part of the story. It's just a little novella. You're supposed to read it, I think, between press and winter, but I read it after winter because I didn't know that. But this, so I told Savannah Grace that she doesn't really need to read this one. It didn't add anything to the story. She's not missing out on any piece of information vital to the story. It really did not further the story along at all. But the reason I did not like this one at all is because it was so much darker than the rest of the series. Like the rest of the series, sure, there's like a war going on, but this one just, it's the backstory of how the evil queen became the evil queen. So, I mean, I guess you could assume that it would be darker, but it just really was. And the characters in there acted a lot more mature in a lot of ways than the characters in Cinder and Scarlet and all of that did as far as their relationships go. And I don't know. It wasn't for me, and I told Savannah Grace to just pass on this one because, like I said, it just felt a little too dark. And honestly, it wasn't good. So I did not like this one. I'm not even keeping this one. Savannah Grace is keeping the rest of the series, but I'm just going to get rid of this one because it was just not great. Okay, so the last book I read was actually a reread. Tiffany from Beautiful Minutia and I buddy read Warbreaker together, and this is a standalone by Brandon Sanderson. It's not part of the Stormlight archive. However, people have said that it's good to read between Words of Radiance and Oathbringer, and so we decided to tackle this one this month. It's a lot shorter than a lot of the Stormlight archive books, and so it was a much quicker read. So the magic system in this is so unique. They use color as the base of their magic system and breath, and it's about this city who is ruled by gods, and each of the gods is what they call a returned, which is someone who's died but has come back to life for a specific reason. So the former royal family has to send their daughter to marry the god king, the god of all the gods in the city, to prevent war. And so she gets to the city and she realizes that marriage and the god king and even the city itself is not really what she expected. And it's just, I don't know, I really enjoyed my reread of this, especially. I really enjoyed this book when I read it for the first time without having read the Stormlight Archive at all. It was just a great fantasy novel. But after, or reading it after knowing some things that happened in the Stormlight Archive, it was so neat to see the little Easter eggs that Sanderson has planted in his books that join them together. I don't want to spoil anything, but there are some characters that show up in here that are in the Stormlight Archive, and even there are some characters in here that I didn't realize were part of Words of Radiance until after I reread this book. And so once I reread this book, I was like, oh my gosh, that's so-and-so. And it was just really neat to make those connections. So I'm glad that we reread this, and I'm excited to continue on with the series with Tiffany, because we're going to buddy read the whole series together, I guess. I don't know. The ones that are out, I guess. But anyway, I'm excited to continue on with the series, and this was a fun reread for sure. Okay, so that's it. Those are all of the books that I read in May. Like I said, I feel like I had a rough reading month. There were some great, let's see. There were some good, I mean, the only truly terrible book was honestly Fairest. But the rest, they were decent or good. I don't know if you've ever had those months where you just come out thinking, I didn't really read anything spectacular. It was just okay. And that's kind of how this month was for me. But anyway, I'm excited to get into June. Excited to read some more summer books. And thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.